Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this exciting discussion about the Christmas bird counts. We've been really looking forward to this. Today, we have a great guest as we're hosting, but a co-presenter and the Missouri Department of Conservation's ornithologist, Sarah Kendrick, who is a great partner and colleague. I guess I'll let Sarah sort of flip through these first slides, and she's going to start off and then go to, then I'll jump in and talk a little bit later on. For those of you who are familiar with Zoom, but not necessarily Zoom webinars, there is a chat feature that people often use. We suggest that if you have questions, to type them into the Q&A portion, and we will get to those towards the end of the presentation if we don't get to them during the presentation. So that's basically the housekeeping of it. So Sarah, am I missing something here? Can you jump to the next slide maybe? What do we got? Aha, those are the people that are on this right now. That's me on the left, Ethan Duke. I'm the co-founder and co-director of the Missouri River Bird Observatory, along with my partner, Dana, who's also a director and co-founder. She'll be moderating today, so she can handle things in the Q&A in the chat. There's Sarah down there looking over some beautiful wetlands someplace. It doesn't look like that's a picture from a Christmas bird count, but there, it looks like it's a nice wetland. But we often partner with the Department of Conservation on a whole host of levels, and we do love working with them, and we have for about a decade now on a host of different projects. So I will let Sarah take it away, maybe back in history or something, and tell us a little bit about CBCs.
Yes, we're going to go back in time. Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah Kendrick. I'm your state ornithologist. I work for the Missouri Department of Conservation. That is your state agency that manages and protects fish, forest, and wildlife resources, and also works to provide opportunity for citizens to learn about and enjoy and utilize those resources. And we also enforce the state wildlife code, or our state wildlife regulations. Pardon me. So yes, I added the MRBO plus MDC equals love, just because I have a lot of respect for Dana and Ethan. They're a great NGO and great partners, very hardworking people. So I appreciate you all hosting these webinars. I encourage participants to look at the other series of webinars that MRBO is holding because, yeah, they're great. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? We're just going to go over we're just gonna have a little chat about the CBC. We'll talk about the history, how it works, 2020, since that is an issue all on its own, how to get involved in the Christmas bird count, potentially maybe easier in the future, and then how the data is used. Ethan will take over the reins to talk about the data heavy parts, to talk about some trends for the state and across the country and perhaps beyond. And excuse me. We'll talk about ways you can help birds in winter to wrap up. So let's get started. So
hey, Sarah, just super briefly,
yes.
We had a couple comments and a raised hand. We just want to let y'all know that this is in what's called a Zoom webinar format. So Ethan described some of the functions of that, but we cannot see you all and we cannot hear you all. So there's more than 100 people on this. I can personally see Sarah and Ethan. I can't see anybody else. But please do, keep on communicating in the chat or the Q&A. Thanks, Sarah.
No problem. That's good. It's the Zoom era. We all got to just jump in when we need to. Okay, so and clear our throats when we need to. So the Christmas bird count began in 1900. So it's our oldest citizen science effort ever. Ornithologist Frank Chapman and 26 participants conducted the very first Christmas bird count on December 25th, 1900. And so hence the name of Christmas bird count. That's how it got its name. And it was Frank Chapman's idea to propose a Christmas bird census as an alternative to side hunts. Now, what are side hunts? Side hunts are when groups would go out on Christmas Day, and that Frank Chapman described this. It may have just occurred in the northeastern U.S., but we're not sure how prominent this activity was. But they conducted side hunts, which means they picked a side. A group went out. You picked a side and went out, and you pretty much shot whatever animal you could take, whether it was feathered or furry or whatever, and then they would compare who killed the most things as a form of entertainment. And so Frank Chapman suggested that we count birds instead of kill them as a way to keep track of those different populations over time. And so, prior to federal regulations, there were no limits on especially waterfowl, which were very abundant, and any other types of birds. We didn't have the Migratory Bird Treaty Act until 1918. And so there was kind of just kind of rampant killing. I hesitate to call it hunting because in my mind, hunting is associated with, ethical adhering to regulations. And so I hesitate to call it that, but it was just widespread and folks had to eat and there weren't federal regulations to stop them. And so there was a lot of harvesting occurring out on the landscape. So on the right here, you see this is a punt gun on a boat, and they were able to kill a lot of waterfowl all at once with these large guns mounted on boats. So after 1918, that squelched a little bit more with the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So who is Frank Chapman? Frank Chapman was the curator of birds at New York's American Museum of Natural History. He's clearly the founder of the Christmas bird count. And what I thought was really interesting in my research about Frank Chapman was that he did field research in Central and South America, which is kind of cool because we continue that on today. It's neat that he was able to see those connections way back then. I don't know the extent of what research he did in Central and South America. That would be research for another day. But a really interesting guy. This is a quote I came across that I thought was really neat. Birds will appeal most strongly to us through their songs. When your ears are attuned to the music of birds, your world will be transformed. Birds' songs are the most eloquent of nature's voices. So very subjective opinion there, but I agree. I'm not biased at all though. But I always say this in bird ID classes that when you learn bird song and your ears become attuned to that, you can never ignore it ever again. It's just kind of a great thing about it is your ears are just turned on. I remember taking ornithology class, and after that, you just can't go outside without being interested in what you're hearing. So I think that's really neat. So there was a publication that began in 1899 by Frank Chapman. He was the editor. And really it was he described it as the organ of Audubon groups way back then. It was the way that they shared news. It was a bi-monthly publication. It was a way for them to share news or observations or information on taxonomy. There are poems in there and poetry about birds. There's all sorts of really cool things. I went on a deep dive into the archives of bird lore, which is what it was called. Anyway, but Frank Chapman he published in the 1900 copy his proposal, his idea to hold a Christmas bird census. And so he references side hunts. He talks about how instead of doing that, there may be an opportunity for people to go out and count birds. So he encouraged people to go out, count birds on Christmas Day where they were, and to send those data to him, clearly by mail, and they would publish those. So that was the beginning of it. He references AOU because AOU was in effect, that's the American Ornithologists Union. It's been renamed the American Ornithological Society a few years ago. And it's just really interesting to see a lot of the origins of these things and go through all the historic data. So that very first year in 1900, there were 13 states and 2 Canadian provinces that participated in 25 counts that first year, including one in LaGrange, Missouri, in the very first year in 1900. I think that is really, really cool. I apologize, sometimes this just happens. So again, on my deep dive into the archives of bird lore, I found scans of the original copies. And so you see Frank Chapman's name right there, is published by the Macmillan Company, February 1, 1901. I think this stuff is so interesting, and you can really, I'll give you the link for this. You can do your own digging, but it's cool because a few months after, he published the results of the very first Christmas bird count, well, I guess the year before. And so there were 25, so he listed all of them. So you can see here it says some Scotch Lake, New York, New Brunswick, Toronto, Canada, Keene, New Hampshire, Illinois at Glen Ellen, and then LaGrange, Missouri. It was held from 9 to noon. It was cloudy, sun seen at times, wind west and steady, temperature 25 degrees, and they had 14 species. So it was at a much smaller scale than it is today. You can see these are the totals of those counts that were generally just held for a few hours in the morning, late morning. And so I just think this stuff is really fascinating. So again, as part of looking through these bird lore publications from 1902, I only got a year in. I didn't look at every year of it or anything. But I found the first publication or report from the Audubon Society of Missouri, which is now called the Missouri Birding Society in Missouri. But the Audubon Society of Missouri is not tied to National Audubon. Audubon was created in 1905. And so Audubon Society of Missouri gave their first report in bird lore in 1902. And they traveled around and did kind of an assessment of why bird declines, which were pretty prominent across the country back then. They were trying to assess why it wasn't occurring in Missouri for their part. So they say market and plume hunters, boys who shoot, and then non-enforcement of the law, bearing the blame in this as in other states. So saying this is occurring in many other states. Then they go through and they talk to a bunch of landowners, and they go through and talk about market and plume hunters. They talk about each of these different areas, English sparrows, house sparrows, and how those are affecting populations. It's just so fascinating to look how here we are all this time later talking about some of the very same things and declines. I just think that's really cool. So if you also want to do a deep dive into the bird lore archives, you can visit this link, or you can just Google bird lore Audubon archives and you can find it. So hours of bird nerd fun, everyone. I say respectfully because I'm a bird nerd and proud of it. Oh, here's more. This was an alphabet poem about birds for young observers. I just think that's so cool. Like old bird publications are probably one of my favorite things because most of them are storytelling. It's beautiful prose because they're describing what it was like to be outside and see the bird rather than scientific writing. And I just think it's so fascinating. And it's just really cool how these publications go between more scientific studies or talking about bird ID, but then they have poems and things for kiddos in there. I think that's really cool. So this is just a piece that's recognition marks of raptors in the sky seen from underneath. We clearly have these things today, but on the right, you see flycatcher ID in black and white. And that's just mean. And so we should all just thank our lucky stars every day for all of the amazing resources we have in both paper field guides, color paper field guides, and online resources. But I just think this stuff is really neat. But try IDing an Empidonex flycatcher from that. So I digress. I'm sorry, I will move on. I love this picture. Okay, so how does the Christmas bird count work? What are the nitty gritty details? So this, clearly the Christmas bird count is a program of the National Audubon Society. They're the ones who run it. And volunteer compilers or coordinators recruit volunteers to count all the birds seen or heard in a 15-mile diameter count circle. So it's pretty large. So you need a team of people, whether that's a small team or a large team. You can't do it alone. You need a team of people to go out there and count. The count period is 1 day. You choose 1 day between December 15th and January 5th. You get 24 hours, sunrise to sunset. Well, it's not sunrise to sunset, it's 24 hours. But you try and maintain the same general date each year to try for that consistency. I think most of the compilers I know try for the same observers every year so that you get that consistency. And usually all parties gather at the end of the day after dark to tally all of their birds. And sometimes that's the funnest part is you have a meal or you have potluck, you have chili, and you all get together and have fun talking about all the birds you saw and tell your stories. And this year will be different, but hopefully this will pass and next year we'll be able to get together again. But I'll talk about that on the 2020 slide. So clearly the Christmas bird count has grown in its success and popularity since way back when in 1900. And these are all the active Christmas bird counts that occur annually. These are on the Audubon website. And this is how you access one. You click on one of those bubbles and it gives you information about the compiler's name and email address and contact information, and then where to meet and the date and all those good things. But I'll talk to you about that in just a second. So there is a very in-depth summary on the website, and usually there's one every year about each year of the Christmas bird count, summarizing the findings and kind of what occurred that year. So the most recent one that's on the website is the 1819 one. So I just wanted to share a few details about how in-depth and large the Christmas bird count is to give you some context. And so in 1819, they attributed some of the low detections for that year because before December, very cold temperatures forced down a lot of migratory waterfowl, especially. But it can happen to other species that are migratory, even short distance migrants. If it's just cold or the cold snap or precipitation, they can move around the state a few miles or move a few states, even on some of our resident birds that don't migrate long distance. So there's also a government shutdown that began in the middle of the count time. And many Christmas bird counts are conducted on federal property. And so that created it created some challenges getting with, federal managers to let people in and things like that. But regardless, 2,600 Christmas bird counts were held, and that's 30 more than the previous year. So there was still a ton of participation, even though there were those hurdles. There were 460 conducted in Canada, 1,900 in the US, and 181 from the Caribbean, Latin America, and the Pacific Islands. And so this is like the new big thing for Christmas bird counts, is to get more coverage on the wintering grounds and stopover sites where birds are for the winter by December and January. So it's to count not only endemics, but also our neotropical migrants that head down there when they're not breeding. So if you're unaware, 1/3 of all of our Missouri breeding birds leave the country completely in the non-breeding season. And so there's a lot of opportunities to detect some of our neotropical breeders from up here down there. There were 79,000 observers, and they logged nearly 80,000 miles either by car or on foot. So that's part of it. When you're a compiler for the Christmas bird count, you not only write down all the species and number of individuals that were detected, but how many miles and time spent that each group drove or walked as an estimate of effort. So this is our beautiful state, and we have about 27 active Christmas bird counts. You can see their distributions here. The red means that they're not seeking volunteers for the count. Yellow, I forget what yellow means. Green means that they are taking volunteers. So I don't remember what the yellow means. I apologize. But yes, I drew the outline of the state. I'm really good at that if you've seen other presentations of mine. So in 2018-19 in Missouri, specifically, we had 28 counts. It was the highest number ever. It was kind of cool. I found our Missouri specific summary today, and I revived the Kirksville Christmas bird count because that's my hometown. And I learned like the year before that it hadn't been held in 4 or 5 years. So I was like, well, I should probably do that. And it said in the first line that they held 28 counts. It was the highest number ever because the Kirksville one was resurrected. So I was like, yeah, Kirksville got a shout out. So there were 547 participants. 147 species were detected, and that's about average. But Randy Korotev was the previous CBC compiler for the whole state, and he's the one who wrote this. So he said it wasn't a crazy year. There aren't many rarities. And the Horton Four Rivers CBC won, even though it's not a competition, but they got the most species detected at 105. So it's a big wetland area, which is clearly our most productive natural community. So that it attracts many, many species. So a more average or kind of low number for an upland Christmas bird count. We had 58 in Kirksville that year. So I would be remiss, of course, to not mention Brad Jacobs, who was my predecessor as a state ornithologist. And Brad loved a Christmas bird count, and he would try and get anybody who would come with him to go on a Christmas bird count to teach them and have that community and hang out with others while birding, which I think was just his favorite thing. And so the Christmas bird counts are a really neat way to get started birding if you're a newbie. because you hang out with people all day long. You don't have to stay the whole day, but you're kind of also in like harsh conditions. Sometimes it can be really, really cold and you're freezing and you're trying to get more like higher numbers of birds. And it just kind of bonds you a little bit more than some other birding experiences. And so it is a great way to try it out and to learn from others and be around other mentors who might be more experienced. So I always try and get people to come with me to Christmas bird counts just for that extra experience and because it's great. So this year clearly is different, but we'll go back to normal in the coming years. So I wrote an article in the Missouri Conservationist with Brad in 2015 about the Christmas bird count and its history. And he wrote this little sidebar that talked about how one of his first birding experiences, like as a group, like as part of a survey, a census, was the Christmas bird count up in the Northeast, and that it was 10 below zero and they were in 3 or 4 feet of snow uphill both ways. And they got 27 species and they were so pumped because up there it's hard on Christmas bird counts when it's super snowy and in the frosty north. So I thought that was really cool. So all of this stuff is available on the Missouri Department of Conservation website on the Missouri Conservationist page if you want to look for that. It was in November 2015. Okay, so how is this going to work in 2020? So clearly this is not ideal for community and building that community and birders or new birders. So the National Audubon Society, that's what NAS is right here on my slide, but they emailed all the compilers in about October and they said, if you want to cancel your CBC, we fully support you. We're behind you all the way. They don't want to put anybody in danger of getting together in groups. So they said, if you want to cancel, we're totally supportive. But if you do hold it, you have to adhere to really strict guidelines. And so that was like, wait till November 15th to make the call about whether you're going to hold the CBC to see how, COVID positives are going. Cancel in-person compilation gatherings, social distancing and masking is required. Carpooling can only require amongst people who are already in a social pod, and activities must comply with all current state and municipal COVID-19 guidelines. So really smart moves, especially when you're talking about these big groups of people across the whole country and beyond. And so I am a compiler. And so some of you, I may have seen the post on the MoBirds email listserv, but just trying to provide some context, but I'm not having new volunteers. I'm not putting anybody together. I'm just pretty much leaning on the folks who have done it before or who I know are available to go up there and do it alone, because that's just the safest way. But I know other Christmas bird counts, they chimed in on the MoBirds email listserv about how they're going to have a Zoom call with all of their birders to have that gathering in that community at the end of the day, because this is kind of the new norm. I think that's an awesome idea. I'm going to try and do that for ours too. So great idea. It's a way to maintain that community and everybody chat about how their day was and what they saw. So we're adapting like birds. So how to get involved in the future. So if you want to look up a CBC that's near you or one that's green or yellow that's taking new volunteers, you just go to the website on the Audubon Christmas bird count. If you just Google Christmas bird count, the Audubon site will be the first link to come up. It's really accessible. You go to join the Christmas bird count and then you can click on a map to see this screen. And so you click on any of these circles that are near you and it gives you a lot of information. It gives you the compiler. My name's on this one just because it's Kirksville. Mine is red because I'm not taking new volunteers. You can put comments in there about where to meet, what time, what the plan is. And so I'm saying I'm not taking new people, but to email me for more details so we can still make that connection and hopefully I can reach out to them next year to participate in that, or they can help me solo, driving around alone and then emailing me the data afterwards. So, okay, so for my part, that's over. I'm going to hand it over to Ethan Duke. So thank you everyone for your attention.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really great. Love that old-timey stuff, early history stuff. It's just phenomenal. And it'd be great if you could put a link to that in the chat. I put some other links in there for the general CBC website, stuff that I'll be sharing and things like that. Maybe it'd be best even to put them at the end, just so people can access those things. And yeah, now I'm going to move in and talk a little bit about, what comes of this data and what are we finding out from it and maybe how it's used. Well, Sarah had a fun, upbeat thing to discover there or discuss as far as the whole thing about the CBCs. And I guess I'll start out with like, I don't want to bring everybody down too bad, but I will share a portion of my screen. And is that it? And I guess everybody knows how to do that. Started on the wrong slide. So just to say a little bit more about the Missouri River Bird Observatory, we do a lot of scientific research and bird population monitoring in general, usually like contract basis type of thing. And we do policy advocacy and education, and you can find out more mrbo.org. And while I'm in the midst of my 10-second commercial, I'd be remiss not to mention that we are in the midst of our photo contest. So we hold an annual photography contest, and you can find more information about that on our website as well. Trends. Well, this is what we've found out. You know, depending on habitat, a lot of our birds are declining quite a bit. Obviously, in Missouri, we have a big focus on grassland, so that's a big issue with us. But when you're doing Christmas bird counts and things, you can also look into the birds from northern climes that may share habitats that aren't here during the breeding season, or sometimes those boreal forest birds come down and visit us, like the evening grosbeaks have been this year, which has been hiding from us. But that's what's happening with these trends, and we know these birds are declining because of a lot of it's from these useful trend information we get from like the Christmas bird counts and the breeding bird surveys, which happen during the breeding bird season. Merbo looks really closely at local level things, state level trends, at density estimates and things like that. But it's important to keep these types of data to help us keep things in context of what's going on in general, the larger regional levels there. But you can also look up more information on the breeding bird survey at some point in time too, if you're interested in these citizen science types of approaches. Right here, we can see that this publication that came out in 2019 in September was pretty shocking to a lot of people, but those of us in the bird community are kind of in the know that we've lost 2.9 billion birds, and that's 30% decline since the 70s. And some of that data you can kind of look at, especially when you pull out particular species, or you want to look at particular circles or count areas. So if you go to the CBC website, they'll offer you a few different link options. And one of them is the Christmas bird count results, and where you can access the historic results as well as more current results. And then there's a trend viewer. And so without boring you too much on data, I'll try to go through this somewhat briefly. Historic data, when you click on that part of the website, this is what comes up. And I know it's like a little awkward and kind of weird, but you got to look at that little thing up there and it says historical. And then you can select at that point by count or by species. And for my purposes, in this example, I just said, I want to pull up by count and see what's going on. So when you get to that particular screen, you can put in the year range that you want. I know that it's really small right here, but that's count start year number 1. So that was the early 1900s, moving into the last year that it was done. And then I decided to do United States, Missouri, and the count code, which I knew from my favorite CBC, which is up at Swan Lake. So I did MOSL. And immediately when you do that, they'll say, great, what format do you want it in? And geeks like to use spreadsheets. So I went with Excel, but you can do like a PDF or whatever format, is compatible with your sinus system and how you want to look at it. So I was like, okay, I'm really digging into this. I want to see Swan Lake all time. Tell me about it. And I was like, okay, there's standard attributes that come up, year, temperature, effort stuff, and all that. I'm like, okay. And then I looked a little bit further and they said, here's the actual effort by number of people and how many hours they put in and that kind of thing when they recorded that type of information, because they didn't always know that effort was important in order to do analysis like this. And then species checklists. And I was like, okay, now we're getting somewhere, because you get to see how many birds historically they counted. And on these particular ones, the columns over here are the year. So this is like 1939, because this is just before WW2. So what I found right away that I thought was really cool about the Swan Lake one is like, this is prairie chicken counts. And they had a 41 year and then 82 the next. And then because of that little thing, I think probably because of the World War, they stopped doing them. They didn't do many counts at Swan Lake until the 70s. And by then the chickens were gone. But I thought it was pretty neat because, I mean, we survey a lot of wetlands up there. We know the habitat, we know the area, and it's just pretty amazing to think back at how much landscape change must have occurred to go, just in this last half a century, all the way down for that many chickens. So you can pull this from any site. So I'm not going to go through all my favorite CBCs, because there's some really good ones out there. But this is where you can find that sort of information and to do your own comparison. There's also a way that you can request data and download it in bulk in a little bit more usable format if you're really into crunching numbers. And I'm sure if you're in the science community, you can probably figure that out. There is this other tab on there that talks about trends. It's a trend viewer. And so what this does is they just throw a little analysis in there for you. So I decided to go to that. And again, the link's up there. It's all on the CBC website. You pull up the page, and in this upper left-hand corner up here, this is where you can fill out your fields for your species, because you're looking for individual species here. And then you go down and look at state providence trends, or you can look at country level trends or bird conservation region trends. We'll get into that in a sec. But here you can see, this is the northern harrier. And this little indicator here is red if they've been declining substantially, blue if they've been gaining. And then the confidence intervals, like how confident are the scientists in these particular stats. And here's the graph showing across years how they may have fluctuated across this entire geography. Of course, you can go and focus just on a state, like I picked Missouri up here, and you can see what's going on with northern harrier there. If you go back to that one, I'm going to go back to this first one, so we can get a good look at kind of that across their whole range in the continent here. And you can see that, they seem to be declining in Missouri. Historically they nested in Missouri in our grasslands, and every year there's still, people see a couple during the breeding season. And so you can wonder what's going on up in Labrador, why they seem to be gaining up there. And you can start positing these types of questions yourself. And is this a climate change thing? Are they shifting their range north? We're not really sure. Maybe somebody is. So let's jump to loggerhead shrike and see what loggerhead shrike do, because they're a great bird to see. Not only breed here, but we can see them in the wintertime. And you can see that they've been really declining quite a bit throughout their range. And it's just another one of those things. We saw that opening trend graph. They're all declining, but here it is reflected in the CBC data. And it's interesting though, because these are state, I have it on the state filter, but what do birds think of political boundaries like states? They don't think much of those. So it's probably better to look at it at the BCR level, the bird conservation region, which is defined by, in a physiogeographic sense, more in line to their habitats, maybe more of a bird's eye view approach to it. So there it is by BCR with the loggerhead shrike. And I can see it seems like the more easternly and southeasternly, they're definitely declining more than they are in that maybe northwest corridor they're seeing. So then I'll put you through one more here, so I don't want to bore you to death with the trending stuff. But this is another wonderful sparrow. If you haven't seen it, make it a goal of a Christmas bird count to see this bird. It's absolutely gorgeous. And it sort of enjoys the same grassland habitat as a Henslow sparrow does during the breeding season in Missouri. And I think the latest estimates by Partners in Flight was like about 80,000 in their total population. So they're one of the least populous sparrows that we get in our grasslands in the central part of the country. And so you can see here, there's its state boundaries and what we've been seeing on the CBCs, but then LeConte sparrow, I mean, he's basically kind of a Canadian anyways. He's like, I want provinces, but we can look at their physiogeographic ranges there, and you can see there's a large swath where they seem to be decreasing throughout the southeast. They're kind of holding on well by those BCRs here, especially just west, which would be like probably the Flint Hills and going up and through that region. So those are good things to make note of when you're looking at this. Sarah went over this. I just want to point out that the yellow ones, I figured out what the yellow ones are. They're contact, they mean contact the person. That all that information, again, I'll repost those links in the chat so you can do that. I can sit here all day and sort of examine the birds that we're most concerned about. So one thing that you can help is joining up and doing a CBC, help contribute to this data. The more people, the better. While you're doing that, there's a few other things you can do to help birds. And several simple actions you can do is one is my favorite one, most enjoyable drinks, shade-grown coffee. Smithsonian has quite a few options out there. My personal favorites, birds and beans, but it really does help birds on their wintering grounds. The birds that we're not seeing on our Christmas bird counts, they have their own plights going on right now. Use less plastic. That's a biggie. Do citizen science. Hey, that's what we're here talking about. That's a thing. Make windows safer. Keep cats indoors. Yep. Get one of those little cat habitat things outside if they gotta be outside. But life expectancy of a cat is halved if it's outside, and we know what it does to birds. Use native plants and avoid pesticides. So that's sort of our follow-up on things. I see there's a few things in Q&A. I'll stop my screen share and we'll make time for those.
Yeah, Ethan, can I just chime in for a second? So I just want to convey to people. So we saw the 7 simple actions at the beginning of the talk. Ethan was great to mention the massive bird declines. We've lost 29% of our North American birds since 1970. That's staggering. It's just hard for us to wrap our minds around. The ornithological community is just in high gear right now, getting together and trying to figure out why this is happening, at what stage of many of these migrants' life cycles. So this week, there's a Road to Recovery webinar that occurred today. It'll be tomorrow and the following day with ornithology's like top minds, the folks who wrote the science article that outlined the 3 billion birds decline. And on Thursday, I'm moderating this panel, no pressure, with some of the folks who came up with like the 7 billion birds concept, because communication is such a massive part of this effort, is just telling people this is occurring first off, and then what they can do to help. Because I think many of us, especially bird lovers, you all who are on this webinar, you're called to action. You want to do something about it. So please, 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 if you have some leeway to spend a little bit more money on bird-friendly coffee or bird-friendly beef, do that research and look that up and just start buying your coffee from someone who does the right thing for birds, for our migrants down on the wintering grounds. Put film or stickers on the outside of your windows if you're having window strikes. I just really, the ornithological community, both research and management and outreach, just anyone, they're all putting their minds together to try and figure out why this is happening at what point in the life cycle of many of these migrants' lives, but not just migrants. And so it is just so imperative and serious. And I just really would call you to action. If you can do one of those 7 simple actions today and change just a little bit, because the hardest part is changing human behavior, right? And so if you can meld just a little bit to help in some small way, it will really add up. And just trying to get that message out to people about how important this is. And we have to do something different or this will just keep occurring. So I don't want to be too dire either, but that's just the reality of the situation. You know, birds are really hurting. They're declining across the board, across many different guilds, and they really need us. They need our help. So
that's awesome, Sarah. I mean, I mean, we're not really like doomsday or naysayer kind of people. We're just pragmatic scientists, and we're like, we see A, we got to do B to get
Right.
to C, and
Right.
that's going to be it. And there's a lot that we can do. Missouri in particular has got a lot of great opportunities, especially when you mentioned, like, bird friendly beef, or just supporting local sustainable, regenerative farming practices makes a big difference for birds and the people that are doing it right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we have some questions. I don't know.
That's
Do you want to
fire
field
away.
those, or do you want me to just start calling them out, or who?
I think that Ethan has to answer the very first one that's in the
Yes,
Q&A.
I agree.
Which is really importante.
It is.
So go ahead, Ethan.
This has got sentimental value. This Merbo hat here, and this is what a Great Pyrenees will do to a hat. And
The question was, how old is Ethan's hat, and can we donate for a new one? You can donate. I don't know if it's the hat, but you can donate for RBO.
People actually, I will put this hat on auction as a fundraiser for Merbo. The people pay more for this type of thing. You'll see them like in the store like this. Opening bids $50.
Oh,
And if anybody puts in more bids in the chat for Merbo, we'll do
nice.
it.
That's
Yep.
awesome. Just think how many birds have been studied and counted and banded in that hat.
How much data crunching has gone on in this hat.
Yes,
Yep.
it's true. It's
You
true.
just get-
I
you get-
answered one before, so I
Yep.
feel like we should address that. So Sue Gustafson said, it wasn't a question, but she was on a Zoom webinar by National Audubon Society. I Googled it and I couldn't find like a public link. So you must be you're in the Cool Kids Club, Sue. But it said, as sponsored by National Audubon Society and the Museum of Natural History. It talked about Chapman's birding expeditions into Colombia from 1910 to 1915. That's really cool. Now the Humboldt Institute and other partners are repeating those same expeditions 105 years later, and to compare the species diversity. So every webinar these days is recorded. I imagine it will be recorded. So I just said to Sue, if you get the link for that, that'd be cool to share, and MRBO can probably send that out to the participants, so we can, because I would like to see that as well. It'd be really neat.
Nuttall and those other ornithologists that came across Boonville Rocheport Bridge describing all the Carolina parakeets that they're seeing in those
Yeah.
bottoms. I mean, that would be a wonderful thing to try to recreate.
Yep. Dan?
So we have a couple
Sorry, go ahead.
different data questions.
Yeah.
Dan is one, and then Sarah has put one in the chat just to make sure we don't miss that. They're related-ish. So the first one is about doing individual autos at Weldon Springs, and another is, which is sort of like an umbrella overarching question. Don't you think the data submitted this year will be hard to compare with previous years due to the lower participation? So overall question and sub question.
I'm not sure about the Weldon part, but I mean, this is one of my favorite questions, the second part. I'm going to steal it from you, Sarah. But I think the most important part, because it's really difficult to compare data across time, especially something this expansive with this many different types of observers and things. But the one thing that they have going for it, which is they have a quantified measure of effort, and that's what it is. So they'll know, well, there was a lot less effort, or the effort was more concentrated. So that really helps with data. Effort's everything. Unless you're doing some sort of abstract occupancy thing, then when you have a non-abundant species anyways. Yes, Sarah, do you want to jump in on that?
No, I think that's great. They do account for that, like you said. I mean, that's why they make you mark down the time that you spent, the hours you spent, and the miles that you drove, because all of that feeds into an analysis. Yes, that's the level of effort, and that kind of, they all take care of that in the analysis. So the folks that crunch the data for the Christmas bird count and the breeding bird survey, I did not envy their task. I mean, they're taking a ton of data across a massive area and trying to make it comparable from year to year with different observers every year with different levels of effort. So they take all of that into consideration. They're not just comparing, apples to oranges each year if there's a bust like this year. But the breeding bird survey, this last summer, many of you, I'm sure, are breeding bird survey participants, they canceled. And so people ask the same questions, like, is this going to throw everything off? And the breeding bird survey has so many data that it won't ruin anything. But yeah, it stinks to lose that that snapshot. But really the Christmas bird count is just that. It's an annual snapshot of winter bird population. Same with the breeding bird survey. It's not perfect. You're not counting every bird out there. It's a survey. The Christmas bird count is a census. You're supposed to count any and all birds you see in there, but we're certainly not counting every single bird in the 15-mile diameter. But so they take all those things into consideration when they're analyzing the data. But really it's on these long-term, huge geographic data sets, they have to just be able to take a snapshot each year and then compare that over long time scales. So it's less exciting because there aren't these big annual trend data that they can share from the CBC and the breeding bird survey, because it's just, we're talking massive time scale here. It's just, that's why they give out these trends every, 5-10 years. So to answer Dan, I do want to answer Dan. He reached out, he wanted to do a caravan and drive separately. Do you feel we're being responsible? I don't want to comment on anybody's being responsible or not responsible. I don't think that that's my realm, but if you feel comfortable and you feel safe, it's maybe if they've canceled the CBC, I would check and see if the compiler will submit your data if you send it to them. If they won't, you could just go out and bird and have fun. But if you are collecting it for data for the CBC, just make sure that they'll submit it, because if they won't, I probably wouldn't do it. You can reach out to some of the other CBCs in your general area and ask their compilers if they're coordinating data for people to go out solo. So that might be an option for that. But.
Well, all that really reinforces people should collect effort data. Make sure whoever your coordinator is, they're collecting that data.
Absolutely. I agree. Katie, I was on a call with earlier today. Hi, Katie. She said, would there be any benefit for there to be local backyard bird counts on the same day CBCs are conducted to help account for reduced effort due to COVID, or would this not be informative in terms of CBC since it's not the same as the yearly survey locations? So that's a great question. I think if your compiler's taking data, yes, count birds at your house. I think that's a great idea, because any data that's extra is good data. It won't be the same again, but the effort will be recorded. And it's a separate field when you enter the data for a CBC to have a feeder watcher. That's just a separate level of effort. So they account for that in the analysis as well. So I say, yeah, if you want to count birds and your compiler will take it, count birds. Paige says, can we get a link to the panel discussion? I'm not sure what panel discussion you're talking about. The Thursday one? If so, maybe.
Probably.
Yeah.
Recording all of that stuff. Yeah, sure. I'll send it to you, Paige.
We've been trying to, trap a feral cat and take it to the Humane Society, but it seems to be not hungry enough to get into the cage. We're pretty sure a neighbor is feeding it, but she says it's not her cat. Any tips?
It's tough for you.
Depends on where it is, because that really varies what your options are for taking it to a humane center once you humanely capture it. Another thing is asking your neighbor, try to have a good relationship and don't have any conflicts, but say maybe it's best for the cat if it's not being fed, or if it is fed, probably the best if it's fed inside. If you're in like around here in Arrow Rock, it's basically going to be coyote food eventually. So
MRBO, are you going to sell window film or stickers as a fundraiser?
I think we do have them. We do have them in our store, actually. Not.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, a little bit of a fundraiser, but they're definitely for helping birds, because a lot of folks have the problem of window strikes. So actually, down in the Q&A, a Karen Leslie asks a question about a window strike. So just to kind of hit those both at the same time, she says she had a sparrow hit her living room window a couple weeks ago and it was very stunned. It did eventually fly off, which is great. This happens at the window at least 3 times over the summer. So the window stickers, they are with us, but they're Window Alert is the name of the company. That's the ones that we use. There are others as well. But the Window Alert ones are They come in attractive shapes like leaves and butterflies. They're UV, so birds see them a lot more clearly than we do. And we've used them here on our house for 12 years and definitely reduced the window strikes big time. I would say 95% or so. So I would definitely give those window decals a try, especially on your worst windows.
Refresh them every 6 months if they're in direct sunlight. You know, that's a good thing.
Nice.
They work.
There's a shade grown coffee question. Are you excited? I'm so excited. Okay, what's shade grown coffee and why does it matter? So I'm going to share my screen because I found this just one slide that helps to describe it. Can you see? No, you can't. Hold on.
Not yet.
Okay. Okay, so shade grown coffee just means that the simplest description is the coffee grows in shade. And so this is kind of like all different types of coffee. So coffee is a small tree, shrub type bush, and it grows berries on it, if you aren't aware, not to condescend. But what's really interesting is before the 50s and 60s, all coffee was shade grown. It grew a higher quality coffee to be grown in shade, but its yields are lower. And so in the 50s and 60s, folks in Central America and different parts of the world where coffee is grown discovered that you can grow and get a higher yield in shade grown coffee. So you see it's at the bottom. It's like our corn or soybeans. It's a monoculture without shade. And so the yields are much higher, but it doesn't provide any habitat for any wildlife around. And so there are different levels of this. You can have a monoculture with shade. You can have commercial polyculture, which is planted trees that you can harvest. Then traditional polyculture with all of these different levels over top of the coffee. And so what is that providing when you leave that old growth or traditional polyculture over top? It leaves foraging habitat for our neotropical migrants. So again, you think about all of the migratory birds that are breeding across the entire US and Canada, up in the boreal, down in our deciduous forest, out west, and how they squish down into this tiny, tiny wintering range that's, you know, mostly tropical forest. And that's where they're foraging and all smashed in together because they're not defending territories because it's not breeding season. So they're all smashed in this tiny, tiny corridor of Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. So they're smashed in these tropical forests. And if it's old growth or it's shade grown, there's trees over top for them to forage in. And so it leaves habitat for them in answer to your question. And yes, you guessed that it's less habitat loss, but it can work together. And so typically bird-friendly coffee, not all shade-grown coffee is bird-friendly. Sometimes there's planted trees that aren't native over top, and sometimes they can get this certification that's shade-grown and it's not really the best for birds. So look for bird-friendly coffee. So as Ethan mentioned, Smithsonian, it maintains moisture. It holds a lot more insects and food for all these birds that are crammed down in this tiny area. So Smithsonian has a certification program called Bird Friendly Coffee with the Smithsonian label on it. I can't, as a department employee, promote a specific product, but just do a little bit of research. Talk to your local coffee shop about, do you know what bird friendly coffee is? Would you consider sourcing some beans from folks who are doing these activities as one roast that they provide? I think that that's a really good way in, and they just may not know about it. And so, yeah, tropical forests can be removed to make monocultures of coffee. And so shade grown, not just coffee, but cacao and cardamom and pepper, things like that are being grown under shade as well. And so, yeah, so that's one thing that's a 7 billion birds action is to buy bird friendly coffee. So I will stop sharing my screen. It's a great question.
It also tastes way better.
I was about to say that it tastes really, really good.
Oh my God.
Better
Okay,
than
so,
like way better.
Yes, we buy 5-pound bags. I wish I could tell you who to buy it from. But we buy 5-pound bags direct from a producer in Costa Rica who ships it to a roaster in Austin, Texas, and they just ship it right to you. And it's comparable in price, and it is so good. It's so good. It's so much, it's noticeably better. So that's my spiel.
We have a bird-friendly beef question as well, so that's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
That's when cows go out there and they lick the prairie chickens. No,
don't listen to Hat Guy.
Bird-friendly beef is a concept that came up a few years ago, but basically there's a certification program that some organizations like the Audubon Society has that certifies ranches, not necessarily the beef, but the beef that comes from those ranches by default, but that adhere to a management plan. In Missouri, they actually work with a Missouri Department of Conservation private lands biologist to come up with a management plan that they adhere to maintain native grasses and within their farmscape, and to benefit our declining grassland birds. And for years at Merbo, we've been going and working on all the Missouri ranches that are in that program to document the densities and changes over time on those areas. So they actually have metrics behind it, as well as a good concept in biology and the management.
I think it's important to note too that a lot of producers are really working towards sustainable and ecologically friendly practices by under a bunch of different names. And so the certification program is awesome. And so if you can find, Audubon certified beef, that is ideal. But they're, just kind of get to know your local producer if possible. They're at farmers markets. If you live in a rural area, they're around you. And basically they're trying to do good things ecologically and use sustainable ranching practices. And that's one of the absolute best things that you can do to conserve bird habitat.
Yeah. I'm trying to keep up with both the chat and the Q&As here.
I know, I'm posting a bunch of links. So I put a link in there about Audubon Conservation Ranching Program, which is bird-friendly beef. It talks about people who carry the products. So you can make that decision on your own. And then Smithsonian, their bird-friendly coffee link is there too. And then the 3billionbirds.org website, which has the 7 simple actions and really beautiful infographics and things like that about the bird declines. And so it helps you share it when you can share something simple and pretty that they've created, which is great. Paige has a good question. Considering our sampling techniques have changed over time, have the CBC methodology changed over time as well? And is there any way to improve it to better sample our winter bird populations? That's a toughie. I don't think it's changed much over time. I'm not sure the date that they implemented the 15-mile, diameter to make that census circle, to be really honest. I'm not sure when that began, but I don't think it's changed for a very long time. And I don't know how, it's hard with any volunteer effort or citizen science effort. It's always a balance between effort, what your volunteers can do at a scale that huge. And so I think, honestly, setting a 15-mile diameter on the map and saying, count all the birds in this is honestly one of the easiest ways to make it a census and not a more, study design with a survey with a point count, or stand at one point and count all the birds for a certain number of times. I think it's just a lot easier to say, count all the birds in the circle, and that way you're trying to get at a census. But you guys, what are your thoughts?
Same. I don't think it's changed much, as long as they keep the methodology, pretty much the same, and they account for effort the same way to be more compatible. I think one of the things that may have changed over time is the quality of optics, and communication amongst birders probably has evolved so that people can, more efficiently cover areas. But so I guess in all, we should probably be seeing increases because people are becoming better birders and they have better optics, and we should see trend increases, but we're seeing fewer.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Diane asks, hi Diane, can CBCs use MODIS data? So MODIS data are pretty sparse compared to the amount of data that you can get with a Christmas bird count. And MODIS data just is kind of looking at something completely different of, not that you couldn't use it, but there really aren't a whole lot of birds flying past MODIS receivers in the winter. Mostly MODIS is looking at these large scale movements of our smallest birds, bats, and insects over these long geographic ranges. So they could, but for winter tracking, which I don't think they've used MODIS for too much yet, it's still really new. but I think it would just be a few data points because you're just getting that detection as the bird with the tag on flies past a receiver in theory during migration. So they've used it for some local tracking during breeding season, but I don't know that they've used it too much in the winter, to be honest.
Sarah and Ethan, on the topic of the CBC methodology, there's a couple related questions. Genus asks, curious why the 15 miles new to the CBC, and then James Bear commented that the circle is divided into quadrants. So if you want to comment on that, particularly as a compiler, Sarah, and like how that works exactly.
Yeah, so it's kind of up to the discretion of each compiler of how you parse out the sections of your Christmas bird count. So I don't personally do quadrants. I don't know if the comment or the Q&A was saying that a way to better sample in the future is to break it up into quadrants. But in some CBCs, like the Kirksville one, in some portions of the count circle, there just aren't very many county roads. And so you just kind of usually use in between a road or a road as a border, and you chunk out your count circle to different participants so that you can give them hard lines to stay within to count for half the day or the whole day. It just depends on what's within your count circle. So the Kirksville Christmas bird count is, you can imagine, very much different than what I referenced, the Horton Four Rivers Christmas bird count, which is a massive, it includes Four Rivers Conservation Area, which is a massive, intensively managed wetland complex. So clearly it holds a lot of waterfowl most of the winter. And with all the other species, there's, you know, a natural area that's a bottomland area that just some years holds hundreds of red-headed woodpeckers and different things like that. And so you can just really rack up the species in an area that large and diverse like that. But yeah, it's up to each compiler how you want to.
But the circle is always the same area.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's
So that's a really,
miles.
so the 15-mile radius or diameter?
Diameter.
Okay. So that is so, as Ethan and Sarah both talked about, so the effort remains the same, because you can imagine that if you had you can't compare someone that, you know, or a team that goes and does a 50-mile diameter circle with someone that does a 15. So when Sarah was saying like Four Rivers is encompassed in that, it's still the same exact area as the Kirksville.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they picked 15 miles. They were probably trying to balance what was feasible in 24 hours and what was an actual good snapshot at the landscape for that all to add up, rather than having a small area. So I'm sure it was just, I'm not sure, but I imagine that it was some balance between how much can we reasonably achieve with a small group of people in one day.
And given the historical pictures that you were showing earlier, Sarah, a lot less then than now. I mean, they just simply could not cover we could cover a lot more ground driving around as we do currently than you know 100 years ago or 120.
Yeah, and that's why the counts were just around someone's farm or their home or a park, you know, because you couldn't get around. Like if you look at pictures back then, it was clearly still horse and buggies and stuff like that. I really went down a rabbit hole.
Technically it's based on the mapping of a 7-minute circle. 7 minutes. And so I mean, that kind of shows how old it is, but yeah, that's the standardized effort, and I think it's a fair amount to cover with a group of people. Like you can definitely spend all day long and part of the dark hours looking for owls and whatnot within that.
Do you think the growth and popularity of the eBird database may eventually replace the need or value of CBCs and migratory bird counts? That is such a good question, Jean. They're working very closely together. The breeding bird survey folks, I'm not sure about the Christmas bird count, but I imagine they're part of the conversation. But yeah, the breeding bird survey folks and the eBird folks are in constant talks about what they can do moving forward. And I haven't gotten any, I mean, I don't have any intel as to what the future holds. But when you think about, yes, you're right. When you think about the data that comes in through eBird, all of the breeding bird survey data from all routes is it's just a moment in time compared to eBird data, just because there's so much eBird data coming in all the time. It just dwarfs the breeding bird survey. However, each has their strengths. So eBird has a lot more data, but it's generally not as much out in the rural areas, which is what a lot of breeding bird survey routes cover. which are spread out. You can tell people to go to the exact same spot over time, and you're not getting that with eBird, though it's also kind of outweighed by the amount of data coming from eBird. So BBS also has its drawbacks too, because it's a road-based survey. So you're biased towards species that are edge species. You're not getting in the middle of wetlands. You're not getting into interior forest patches because you're driving. And so it's harder to get at those less common natural communities. So each has their issues, but moving forward, the Breeding Bird Survey just had a big new strategic plan for the next 10 or 15 years. And so yes, talking to eBird is certainly part of that. I wish there was a way you could enter your BBS data into eBird and that they had like a format for that so you didn't have to enter it twice. Because there's ways to put it in eBird, just kind of a pain. But yes, they are in talks, but I don't know what those talks are. So
yeah, it's interesting watching the evolution of eBird, but eBird's still a platform that tracks birders and where birders go a lot more than, it's not really getting people to different areas. A Christmas bird count circle, you're just going to get people to go someplace they might not necessarily want to hang out during the winter time.
Yeah. The Breeding Bird Survey and Christmas bird count certainly force people by having those set locations to go to the same place over time to have that consistency that eBird does not have. Yeah. Does the Breeding Bird Survey in Missouri mirror the same trends worldwide? If you're talking about the bird declines, then yes. So I have another presentation that shows the bird declines, across North America. And then I say it's not just North America, and there's Breeding Bird Survey trends that show that for particularly grassland birds. So just majorly tanking. So last year, the year before, MRBO was a partner in it, but we created the Missouri Bird Conservation Plan with all bird conservation organizations in the state, agencies, and organizations who knew about bird response to habitat management. And so there's the Missouri Bird Conservation Plan technical section that talks about our most threatened species. It assigns a Missouri concern score, and it talks about broad management guidelines by species, how to help these birds. It was written for both public and private landowners. It's accessible. It talks about why we should even care about birds at the beginning. So the point is to kind of like this 7 billion birds stuff is like trying to give people a call to action. Habitat management and changing your land if you have acreage is part of that. And so it has trends in there that were both at the Breeding Bird Survey level and nationwide. And we really assessed which species in Missouri are our most threatened. And it's like 29 species. I'll put a link to it in the chat, but it might be worth a read if you're interested in looking at trends and what our most threatened species are in the state.
It's a great question. And Sarah brought up that, yes, it is global as well, which when Sarah mentioned earlier that, we're still trying to find, what are some of the underlying causes, because, habitat decline's been going on forever. And now we've seen it max out on a lot of our habitat decline in some places. And so there's other factors contributing. Well, if it's a global phenomenon, then the same factors are happening elsewhere. So the solutions are going to be kind of global, but they're not going to be global in scope. The solutions are going to be local in scope, and that's how it's going to build out. And our solutions are going to work a little differently and hopefully a little faster maybe than some other places. Hopefully get really competitive there. But those, conscientious consumers, those types of things, that's going to make a difference. And same drivers everywhere.
Yeah, that's the thing. You look at these bird trends that are just so overwhelming, and you can feel really helpless, and it's just really overwhelming. It's really a blow to try to be optimistic looking forward. But I'm an optimistic person. You just got to look at what you can do, and I just don't want people to think that this is out of their hands and that, well, it's too big for me. What can I do? All of us can do something starting tomorrow to address one of these reasons. The highest causes of mortality for our wild birds are outdoor cats. Unfortunately, I know it's a tough issue to talk about. Outdoor cats, window strikes. But the threats on the stopover sites and wintering grounds are just as important. And we don't know the breadth of those threats and those impacts yet. And so if you can purchase coffee that's bird friendly, things like that, there are things all of us can do tomorrow on that 7 simple actions list. It requires a change. But some are just such simple changes that I just really ask you guys to pile on if you can afford it and make some of those little steps. It's just it's so necessary right now. We can't wait,
I'm starting to find some of them more affordable. Like I want to get rid of plastic. We were sick of having plastic pasta. Pasta always comes in plastic. So we just started making our own pasta, and
Nice.
we're saving money. We don't have any more plastic, and it tastes better.
And we all got time.
Right,
To learn to
right.
make pasta.
It's not that hard. It really isn't that hard. It doesn't take that much time either.
Yeah. Edge says, yeah, Columbia CBC has always included a feeder watch segment. Yeah, mine too. I have a few people that always do feeder watches for the Kirksville one. It's a good contribution to our CBC. I agree. So if all of you are sitting at home and there's a count circle near you, or you're within a count circle, check out that map and reach out to your compiler. Say if you're submitting data and you haven't canceled your CBC, I'd be happy to watch a feeder. And you can watch it for an hour. You can watch it all day. You can watch it for a few hours. As long as you track that, it's all usable data. So that was a good comment. Anyone using black light flashlights when they count owls? I don't count owls very often, so you all are probably the better ones to answer.
Only while banding, not. I don't even think I've heard of folks like Paul McKenzie, who's one of the biggest owlers that I know, using a black light. So that's an interesting question.
They go by ear, I think.
Yeah.
That's another thing that's good about hopefully having some Zoom follow-ups with these CBCs. Another good reason to enjoy doing CBCs is because you run into people like Paul McKenzie, or formerly be like Brad Jacobs, where you can just absorb so much great knowledge about little birding tips and techniques and things like that particular question. They'd be like, no, maybe not a black light, but I've got this tip for you. And all those things really, really come together and make people just better birders and having fun doing it.
I agree.
I think this is a nice ending question from Paige. No, that's great. I don't know who this Paige person is, but it's a really great question. Who is this? I don't know. Someone that educates or something. So before we do this, I don't know if everyone can see the Q&A. I don't really think so, but I'm going to relate Paige's question to y'all, and you can put your answers in the chat, because I think that'd be really cool.
That's a good idea.
But I do want to say that we will, as an MRBO, we will compile all of these links that we have all been putting in the chat. I know some people are on phones or whatever devices where it's not that easy to get links in the chat. We will put those all together with the recording of this into an email and send it to everybody that registered. We were actually full up, and I think some people probably weren't even able to get in tonight. So that was awesome. Yeah, no, that's really great.
Oh, so, Dana, tell them about December 11th too.
Oh, good idea. Great idea. So, and we can put that in the email as well. But Sarah and I are doing a workshop called Birding, Winter Bird. And that is next Friday evening, the 11th, at I believe 7 p.m. And that is with the Missouri Birding Society. That is another good organization that you might want to look into. Their website is mobirds.org. And so that's kind of that particular webinar. It's going to be sort of like this, but it's going to be where you can be seen and heard as attendees and speak up if you want to. But we're going to talk about some of the winter specialties here in Missouri, some of the finches and sparrows and things. So that should be really interesting next Friday night. Yeah. Anything you wanted to say about that, Sarah? I'm excited about it.
Yeah, it'll be good. It's good timing.
It's gonna be the first of our workshops. Really, there's going to be a series, and so when we're all free to move around again in groups, there will be field trips associated with them as well, through the Missouri Birding Society and some of the Audubon chapters. So
yeah, I encourage everybody on here, if you're on Audubon chapter or whatever, send it to your members. We're gonna have it on December 11th. It'll be really fun. It's kind of for beginner or intermediate birders. Anybody can attend. Clearly, it'll be lots of fun, but it'll cover a smattering of different winter birds and kind of an intro to bird watching section at the beginning that I'll try and keep brief, though I get really excited about it. But it should be fun.
Okay, and before we let everybody go, what is the best or your favorite bird you've seen on a CBC? Anyone can answer. Just throw it in the chat and everybody will see it.
What's yours? What are your guys's? Dana, Ethan.
I'm gonna have to say the short-eared owls
Yeah,
at
I was
Paintbrush
gonna say
Prairie.
that.
Oh my
I
God.
took yours, sorry.
Yeah,
The
the-
writing,
You took
No, it's-
everybody's.
No,
No,
but
no,
the best
the
part was
writing was
the
perfect.
Northern Harriers were cruising around, and
Yes.
as they were going down, the short ears were coming up, and they were just like hovering like moths right in front of us. That was so cool.
It's so great that anybody who's seen short-eared owls are just like, it's so magical. Like, I think some of my favorite things are Cole Camp, CBC. You go out to like those little postage stamp prairies out there. And I remember I went to a few CBCs at Cole Camp with Brad, and they never put us on the same team. So I'm still bitter. I'm just kidding.
Ooh.
But I go out to those postage stamp prairies, and yeah, you're just walking along. And for those people who don't know, short-eared owls roost down in the grass. And so they come up in the evening to hunt. And so if you like walk in a line across the grassland and with thick grass, or you just walk through. I remember this one time I was by myself. I was birding with this Amish man who, the Amish and Mennonite, they're really active CBCers, depending on where you are in the state. Is really cool. They're really good birders. And so I was with this guy, and he stayed in the car, and I walked across this area. And so I was like by myself, and I was like, oh, I'm going to get short-eared owls. I was so excited. And I like turn around, and there's like, in a matter of 20 or 30 seconds, there were like 7 or 8 short-eared owls just like, they float out of the grass like ghosts. You don't even hear them. You're just walking through, and you turn around, and there's an owl flying because they're so silent. And it's just like, oh, it's just the most magical thing ever. They just like float out of the grass and just, float around and hunt. I love them so much.
So did we steal yours, Sarah?
Yeah, but that's okay. Well, I like, there's always a rough-legged hawk that hangs out in ag fields in Kirksville, and that's always really fun to see because I don't see them very often.
Yep.
But yeah, short-eared owls, man, it's hard to compete.
We've got Northern Shrike, Rufous Hummingbird in Springfield,
Nice.
Lesser Blackback Gull, Scissortail Flycatcher, Yellow Rump Warbler. First time ever seen one was a CBC. A river
Nice.
of 2 million blackbirds heading for their roost. Saw them more than once.
That's cool.
Kim says, nothing too unusual at a CBC yet. Excuse me, but I saw my first peregrine falcon last weekend. Nice.
Nice.
Greater black-backed gull at Riverlands.
Nice. They're so good. CBCs are so fun. They're just such a good way to learn so much from people that you're hanging out with all day long. Just think about it. You learn a lot.
All right.
Prairie Merlin.
Roadrunner. Charlie says Roadrunner in the Q&A. That's awesome.
Well, yeah. Those people down in Springfield down there, they get those things more often.
Ryan says Cole Camp Prairies will have their count this year on December 28th. They don't typically have feeder watchers, but they would accept data if it was submitted. So reach out to your compiler. You just don't know what they're going to do this year, so you may as well reach out and ask. If you can be full and you want to, then may as well.
Cedar waxwings.
Those are good ones.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy birds.
Merlins are awesome.
Birds.
Wow. Rufous hummingbirds. All righty, everybody.
All right. Yep. Well, we should let everybody go. Thanks for sticking with us.
Thank you all for joining us, and we'll put the recording out there and the links and things.
Yeah, it was really fun. Thanks to MRBO for initiating it and having me, and it's really fun. It's fun to do these things with you guys. So we'll
see you
guys
next
Friday.
Week. Yep.
I'll put this hat on the Merbo merchandise website.
Ethan, nobody wants that hat. It's gross.
Oh yeah, I'll autograph it.
Oh,
I won't even wash it. It still smells like my dog.
Everyone, I'm gonna spare y'all and I'm gonna end the meeting right now. Okay.
Okay. Bye all.
See y'all next week.